All right, back with part two. Hopefully you got through that exercise okay. Here's my answers. I'm not going to go through all of them, but let me give you some examples there. So the function parse int, the parameter was a string, right? This is the one where we put in a string and out would come an integer. So it returns an integer value. The input or parameter is a string value. And notice that some of them don't have any parameters. So c.clear, for instance, was a procedure that cleared our console window, but it didn't have any parameters at all. So it is allowed to have no parameters at all, and that's fine. Some of them could have string parameters. Some of them have character parameters or integer parameters or all sorts of things. So um, uh, and all sorts of outputs too. I want to mention here some of them. This one has an input of a character, I believe, or maybe a string. It could be, and the output is an integer. Math Power has two integer parameters, and the output, the return value, is another integer. This one's pretty neat. Input dot equals exit. Well, the input is a string, but what's the output? What's the return value of input dot equals? Well, it's a Boolean. It's either a true or a false. And so that's interesting. The input is a string and the output is a Boolean. And it can be, we can have functions and procedures that have all sorts of different parameters. All right, so these are built-in ones. I've got some more to say about these built-in functions and procedures. It says the code for these functions, the actual code themselves, called methods, is built into Java. Sometimes we must import the necessary classes or records. Remember those import java.util.star. Sometimes we had to. So the code itself for those things is somewhere, right? Somewhere. So somewhere there's a record. Remember, records aren't called records in Java. They're called classes, called integer, and has a function called parseInt. So I'm picking on this one. We're going to talk about this as an example. So parseInt was a function, and somewhere there was a record called integer that had this as a function in it. So I want to show you a little bit about that. So this is what the first line of the code that actually exists somewhere in Java, what it looks like. It says in this first line is called the method signature. So the signature gives us, basically an idea of how to use the function and how what will be returned. So in the brackets here are the parameters. So we know the parseInt is expecting a string parameter, and this right there on the left side of the function name. So the function name is parseInt. On the left side is the return value. The other thing in the method signature is this idea of this static. We're not going to worry too much about this static. This could also, if static's not there, that means something different. But we don't have to worry about that too much in our course. That's more got to do with ICS4U. But sometimes that word static will appear, and that means that we don't have to actually be working on a record to be able to use the parseInt method is basically what that means. If you would like to know more about, actually, I'll take you there. I'll take you there. Why not? This is the actual documentation. This is the actual, how to use this record, this integer record. And we see all the different attributes, max value, min value, size, type, are all attributes that are built into the integer class or the integer record. And there are a whole bunch of functions in integers. Look at them all. And there's the one that we were talking about. And that's right there is the signature. It expects a string and returns an integer. Okay? And I wanted to show you that, just to show you that I'm not making this up, that it actually exists somewhere, and a lot of different details. And over here we can actually get the method detail for parse int. Where's parse int? So there, public static parse int. This tells us exactly what the parameters are and what the return value are, and that's pretty in-depth documentation. This is straight from the makers of Java. Now, are we going to get this complicated? No. Back to our note. What we want to be able to do, of course, is be able to write some of our own subprograms, right? We've already been using the built-in ones. Let's figure out how to write our own. So for a procedure, this is what it looks like. Public static, and the public part just means that anyone can use it. Static, we were talking about that word static there before. Void means, and we'll see soon, that nothing is returned. That word void means nothing is returned back to the main program. Then the procedure name, and we get to make that up. And then in brackets, like we saw before, are all the parameters. When we define our functions and write our own subprogram, these we have to list the parameter types. So this would be like string s and int num, or whatever the name of our parameters are. And then inside here are all the statements that will do stuff. That's our subprogram. And we'll see an example soon enough. Notes. You don't have to have parameters. This could be blank, and we saw that with the built-in ones. The static means that you aren't dealing with an object or record when you run the method. So last day when we were talking about records, we had, student1 dot name equals FIRD. That student name business. Static means we don't have to have that student name business. We don't have to have an object. And again, that's more grade 12 computer science for us rather than ours, but that's why that word's in there. The void shows that no value is returned. This shows that we're talking about a procedure instead of a function. In main, so notice that I'm going to get to an example. I'm going to start the example right now. Why not? So here's my ready, and I'm going to start a new HSA console. I'm going to call it function procedure note, something like that. That's all good. And so where do my procedures get defined? It's in this space up here, not in my main. My main is actually what's going to be run. My procedures go here. So I'm going to have a public static void, and I'm going to call it say hello. And this one's not going to have any parameters. This is the end say hello. This is just to help me figure out where it starts and stops. And then what is this going to do? This is just going to go c.println hello. Fantastic. There's our first procedure. It doesn't return anything, so it is a procedure. Back in our note, let's make sure we got everything. That looks good. Yeah, good. We didn't have any parameters, so that's all good. And now if I run this, finished execution, it didn't say hello. Well, we haven't actually invoked, we haven't ran, we haven't called our procedure. Our main program, which is right here, doesn't do it. So we actually have to call our procedure. So I have to down here, and it looks a lot like the functions and procedures built in, except for we wrote that, right? So now, if I run it, it'll actually call that method and do that. So notice that one thing we might want to do is we might want to include a parameter that might be a person's, this say hello to a certain person. So then now I would need a parameter here, and here's his, so we're going to call this name or something like that, and it's a string, so when I call the function, FIRD will become name here, and then I want to print out hello plus the name. And then that parameter is going to go in that place. Okay, so if I stop that and run it, now it's going to work. Dandy. Now notice also, by the way, even if I had this parameter called in there, if I didn't use it, that would work. Still work. But, so what's the sense of having that there? Well, who knows? This makes our code more flexible. Let's put it back in there. But I want to show you what happens if I call my function, or my procedure rather, it's expecting a string to be read in and nothing happens. Right there, the parameters aren't there. Error. It says no applicable overload, blah, 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 blah. Perhaps you wanted blah, 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 blah. And it tells you down here, maybe you wanted to call say hello that's got a string involved there. And you're probably used to this error message when you're using the built-in function. So it's telling us that we need a string in there. Even if I were to put something like 45, which is a parameter, it's expecting a string. This is still going to give me, right? It's saying, hey, Dunn, you should have a string in there. And so if I change that so it's actually a string and run it, that will work. Okay, so there's an example. Back in our note, I explained that once we write our procedure, we actually have to call it. And that was that say hello line or proc name, wherever that happens to be. And it can be called in the main part of the program, or even we can have functions calling each other. All right, example. We already did the example, and so I'm going to come back to that example later. Syntax for functions. I'm going to pick up the syntax for functions in part 3 of this video.